the internet and all that was very confusing to me. And, that I tried to be progressive and learn things. And it took me a long time. And, like you said, it was around by 2005. And then Universal Press, they changed their name too, had UClick. Maybe they still have UClick, which is another venue. But again, I was unfamiliar and I didn't get it together.
I do really remember feeling strange that it was pretty much you and Curtis were the only two that, other than like Franklin or, the occasional black character popping up. That was pretty much it. Yeah.
I mean, well, let's see. When that was another problem when they were trying to sell me. And I'm not sure if you are aware of this, but maybe you are. But my dad was a cartoonist, nationally syndicated cartoonist. He had a comic strip, Luther, Los Angeles Times Syndicate. And 30 years before me, when they tried to sell his strip, they'd say, we already have Wee Pals. We don't need Luther. We already have Quincy. We don't need Luther. For me, they would even say, we already have Curtis, and they wouldn't take me because they already had Curtis. And they would also say, we already have Kathy, so we don't need Where I'm Coming From. So I was, hit by both sides.
The Curtis thing to me is funny in particular, because I would say that probably thematically, it's probably hedges closer to Kathy, because Curtis is really just, it's like it was a kid strip, it was like a lighthearted kid strip, and the family happened to be black.
Yeah, he took on some themes.
He did, but I just mean from the standpoint that Kathy was kind of an older person's strip.
Yes, and a woman. Yeah. So that all that's true, but to think that you can't have two women's points of view when all the other cartoonists under the sun were men.
We have Mary Worth in our newspaper. We don't need.
Yes. Oh my gosh.
Do you suspect that it would have been easier or more difficult to really make a name for yourself had the strip come along 15, 20 years later and online comics were already a thing?
Well, that's an interesting question. Because, I actually created Where I'm Coming From in 1982. And I didn't get, and it was for a magazine, and it was a black magazine, and it folded before I was printed, before I came out. Anyway, so
I'm in publishing, so that is not an unfamiliar story to me.
Yes, I did see that, because I was at Parents Magazine for 18 plus years. I was at Essence Magazine so I know too.
Yeah.
But
Essence is still going, are they not?
Still going. They had a competitor at the time. It was called Elan, and it came out 2 issues. I was like, this is an exciting paper, news magazine, And when I met the editor in chief, she's like, you're kind of funny, and you draw. Maybe you can do a comic strip. I was like, yep, I can do that. But I had no idea. So I kind of stumbled into becoming a cartoonist. And then when it happened, it just happened the way it did. That Detroit was looking for it. I had it. I sent it. They liked it. I was printed. I went out and tried to get the syndicates interested in me. And I say your question is interesting because much later, or while I was doing it, I felt like people would say, you've opened the doors for the likes of, Bianca Eunice and Steens and these young women now who are doing it, that I opened the door. But I felt like when I was doing it, that I was actually clogging the door. Like I was in the way. They're like, we've got Barbara. We don't need it.
You were somebody else's Curtis.
Yes, I was clogging. Yes, absolutely. And it's a shame. It's a shame. But, times are changing and there are a lot of independent comics now. So a lot of people are getting the voices out there.
I feel like Boondocks in particular played an important role in really kind of kicking the door down.
I do too. I mean, Boondocks, same syndicate, Universal Press at the time, was really out there being strong, talking about Black themes, talking about real Black folk.
Yeah, characters named after Black Panthers.
Yes, all of that, was powerful. And I think he did. And he came out when he started he had more strips at the start than like anybody, like they were like Universal Press was like, wow, he came out with, I don't know, hundreds of papers straight out the box, so I think we kind of did open the door for him, like my dad did. They're like, okay, maybe we can use a Black comic, maybe we can. So yeah, it's interesting. He did do some, and I think he felt most comfortable doing the animation.
And this is not to disparage Boondocks as a comic, because I certainly read it and enjoyed it, but it really did feel like he was kind of ramping up to do the show.
I think so, and he did it daily. That's quite a schedule to keep, and to get all that notoriety and still have to, it doesn't matter what's going on, publicity, this, that, talks with other people about other things. You still had to get the strip done. You still had to meet your deadline. And I think he had trouble doing that too. It's like, it was a lot to juggle.
I think 99.99% of the population would have difficulty just coming up with a gag every day, let alone drawing every day.
Yeah. Yeah. A daily, my dad did a daily. And so I saw every other week he was doing 2 weeks of Luther. So I actually saw how it was done. I, on the other hand, created this for a magazine, which I thought was going to be a monthly. I was like, bet 12 in a year. I could do that. And then when I got picked,
I could write a year's worth in a week, really.
Well, good. And then when they took me as a daily, a weekly, and I was from all of the syndicates said, like, you have to do a daily. You can't do a weekly. They told me everything I was doing. They said I couldn't do except for Universal. And so so every 2 weeks I was doing 2 strips, and I was like, I can keep this up. I can do this.
Why did that end up being your cadence versus just doing a strip every week?
They would do every other week. They would do. So
they took 2 at a time.
Yes. Yeah. And, it could be that that's what syndicates do. My dad didn't have the same syndicate, but I know he had to do 2 weeks every other week. So every 2 weeks he had to have 2 weeks done.
In terms of, when you were really in it and actively doing it, how did you budget that time? I mean, did you end up just drawing and writing 2 in a week?
Yeah. Well, what I would do is keep notes. Notebook or whatever is close that I needed to write down. If by my nightstand I might have had a tissue box, and I'm like, I had an idea. I write it in the back of the tissue box, and I write it. And then when I knew it was almost due, I was like, okay, out of these ideas, what can you make out of it? And I essentially, my method was always knowing what the gag is, and then backtracking and like making up a conversation to lead to what I wanted to say. And then once I did that, I was like, oh, this seems like something Nicole would say, because she was kind of airheady, so I was like, I started thinking about who it would be, and that's how I did it.
Part of me, I think, understands the reticence on behalf of the syndicates as far as the weekly thing, because it's really, that's how newspapers are set up, right? I mean, they really are for daily strips. And is that part of the reason why it ended up on editorial pages in a lot of cases?
Actually, I wanted it aside from, I kind of understood what it meant, the real estate in the newspapers on the comic pages. You had to draw by it had to fit a certain aspect ratio. It had to be, exactly what they needed. And you could only get in a newspaper if another strip is taken out. And what's wild is that in my paper at home, I guess I grew up in Long Island, it was Newsday. And when my dad's strip, when they ended his 86, something like that, they took out Luther and they put in Calvin and Hobbes. And so just being a knucklehead, I was like, I'm not reading that. That took my dad's spot. It's like, and then when I read it, I was like, oh man, this is funny. This is hilarious, And so
one of the greats, really. I mean, like undisputedly so.
Yeah, exactly. And I was trying to give it a little, I was hesitant to get into it because it took my dad's space. But what they can make more money if you do a daily, of course. And, they would say to me, you'd get a wider audience if you did a daily. And I liked the idea of being on the editorial page or being on the women's issues page or being on the somewhere separate. And that was because I was a big fan of Jules Pfeiffer, and, you see it in the Village Voice, and here he has these characters talking directly to the reader, and it was once a week, and it was this large space. I was like, oh, I love that. Yes, I love that.
It's such a dumb thing, but obviously I was familiar with your strip, and I remember reading it when it was out. But in preparing for this conversation, I was listening to some interviews that you did, and you mentioned Jules Pfeiffer, and it clicked for me. It's like, yeah. Obviously, like the Village Voice strips, obviously that was a huge influence on the layout.
Yes, absolutely.
There's also a freedom in not having it on the comics page as far as subject matter, I would guess.
Yes. Although I never entertained the idea of putting it on the comics page, even though even to the end, when it was time for me to, because, with a relationship with a syndicate, there's something built into the contract where if you come down to a certain number of papers, either one of us can quit. If it's below this certain amount, either one. And they kept me on longer than they needed to because I didn't want to stop. And I was glad. Lee Salem was, my champion, man. And I even then, when he's like, okay, we really do have to stop now, but how about if you did a daily? He's like, just give me something, and I did come up with something that I thought was pretty clever, that I thought might work. And he liked it, but he couldn't get enough people on board. It was like, you're betting 500. He's like, I know you don't understand what that reference is. I have no idea. Like, half the people like it. I was like, oh. But he knew me that well. He could throw that out. And I'm like, I don't know what that means because I'm not a sports person.
Baseball is funny because it's like one of the rare instances in life where you can be successful 1 out of every 3 times and still be considered very successful.
Yeah. That's interesting. Yeah. But I didn't get the reference, but they decided to pass on it. And I wasn't like, let me send it here and there. And I was like, okay, maybe it isn't that great. I kind of settled back into life,
Yeah, into having a family and being a human, I guess.
And working at a magazine. Yes. It takes a lot. Yeah.
What was that second strip?
It was called Druthers. If I had my druthers, it was Druthers. It was like, so it was a single.
That is a very comic strip name.
I showed it to, many people, and some of us like, Druthers? Who even says that word? It's like, but I think it works because if I had my druthers, it would be this or that, that's what it was. But it was a single panel, and I thought it might be able to work, but it didn't. It didn't.
It was a gag, so it was sort of almost like Far Side style.
Yeah. So like if I'm going to try to think of one. If I had my druthers, it was when I walk into a fine store, that I'm not, that the security card is, I'm going to get it.
You're going to get your druthers sooner or later.
Yeah, it'll come to me. But it was like, the idea was if I walk into a fancy boutique, why nobody's paying attention to me. Anybody who works there is not paying attention to me. The only person who has eyes on me is the security guard, because that's what you feel like as a Black woman walking into Tiffany's, say, So it's those kinds of applications.
I'm thinking of Al Jaffe's work, that it's almost like you had a good gimmick, it sounds like.
I thought, yeah. Al Jaffe, yeah. That's kind.
So speaking of names, was the strip name, did that come from you too?
It did. So again, it was created for a magazine. So my intention was 12 times a year, I would have a different Black woman talking about where she's coming from. So it was just where I'm coming from. And it was this one woman head talking. And that seemed to work really well, in my opinion, and they liked it right away. And then when I started trying to, when it sat and collected dust for a long time, but those same samples that I came up with for the magazine, I sent to Detroit when Marty Claus, who's the executive editor at the time, asked my dad, "Do you know any black cartoonists?" And that's when he said to me, "You're going to talk about it, you're going to do it." I was like, "I'm going to do it." And I sent her the very same ones that I had sent to the magazine all those years ago. So this is from 1982 to 1988. And I sent those, and they liked them, and they went with it. I kept it where I'm coming from. And originally I thought I would just do a different woman every time. But the syndicate didn't like that. They're like, no, you have to have somebody that
you need characters
that the audience can link onto, like Blondie. It's there's somebody that they can. I was like, well, so I whittled it down to the 9 that I ended up with. And I just kept it where I'm coming from. I mean, I didn't change it to where we're coming from. It just said where I'm coming from.
I feel like I kind of abstractly understand what it means to have them talk about where they're coming from, but how did that kind of manifest itself on the page? What did it mean for them to talk about where they were coming from?
Well, I felt from the beginning, like it would just be somebody that you run into and you're talking to that person and you don't know anything about them. You don't know what their job is, where they live, if they've been to school, if they work, whatever. But they're coming from someplace, they have a certain point of view and they have a certain position they take on different things around you. So that was the idea of, just you run into this woman and she's going to tell you where she's coming from. And it has nothing to do with any of that other stuff. It has nothing to do with her body. It has nothing to do with her job necessarily. It has nothing to do with, how fat she is, whatever, what her BMI is, that she had this point of view on this subject.
But it could, right? It could have to do with her BMI if that's the thing that she's sort of thinking about or struggling with that
every
week.
Once in a while, I would, when my character Jackie, she worries about, being, overweight.
That's an interesting frame as well. The initial concept, it sounds like it's effectively a character study, which isn't something you really see in, certainly not newspaper comics.
Yeah. I guess you're right. I can, really talk about my dad's strip. I knew his characters. I knew what to expect from his characters. So I know that, cartoonists do, decide what they want their character to be. But I was happy to stick with these same women and have a wide range of what their views are on the world and their lives. It made it fun. I said a part of everybody, every one of those is actually me, It
sounds like there's a sense in which you did kind of keep to that original idea, but you built yourself a cast of 9 characters who could play those roles.
Who could play those roles and interact with each other, which was not the intention in the beginning. It was just going to be the character to the audience. And once I was, whittling it down, I was like, this is interesting to have them relate to each other. And sometimes you don't agree with what a friend's doing. You think it's stupid what they're doing and you roll your eyes. You're like, oh, are you kidding me? So that was one of the things that one of the favorable reactions I got was that there's, the idea of seeing women who are best friends and their relationship. And that was probably filling a void in the newspapers as well.
There's a very literal sense in which they are talking to you directly. It's almost as if in a lot of cases the conversations are really happening between 2 strips.
That's interesting. When Jerry Kraft is also a friend of mine, and we've known each other since I don't know, the 80s or probably certainly the early 90s. And we had actually thought about maybe we could do a strip together, like he would have the male character and I would have the female character. I mean, we talked about a lot of things, but that was one of the things we talked about. But I felt like it was all the same strip. I felt like when I had them talking to each other, I felt like I wanted people to feel like they were eavesdropping on these women talking and picking up what they're saying and getting to know them, but not really knowing them. And then otherwise, I'd have them speaking directly to the reader.
It's funny, you mentioned your dad's strip going away when he decided to finish it, and that he was like, yes, I do know an African American cartoonist, which is funny because obviously this is not the case here, but like there is a certain like built-in nepotism to a lot of comics from the standpoint of people camp out on the comics page to such a degree that they like they pass it down to their children.
Yes. I mean, I just met, oh my gosh, the guy who does Heathcliff. Love him.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. And at the CXC was a cartoonist thing.
Yeah, Columbus.
Yeah. And it was passed down to him from his uncle, I believe. And, then the Lockhorns, the husband gave it to, passed it down to his wife, and the Beetle Bailey guys, that was passed down. So what's so striking to me, and I don't need to break my arm patting myself on the back, but what was so striking to me was that I had a separate strip than my dad's. I had a separate syndicate than my dad's. I actually have the rejection letter I got from my dad's syndicate. I wanted them to put that in the book. I was like, what about the rejection letters? You want that? Because that's.
Did they end up putting them in?
They didn't put the rejection ones in, but they do. But there's a series of letters that shows how where I'm coming from came to be. But I don't know if there's another father-daughter who have both been, and we're both in the Library of Congress. And somebody at the Library of Congress said, we don't think we have any father-daughters, in the same category like we have you guys. And we were separate. I didn't take over his strip. I didn't take over his syndicate. He did say they did reach out to him because he was a cartoonist. And he did say to me, you tried to do this before. Are you still, willing to try? And he was like, are you presentation ready? And I was like, yes, indeed. What does that even mean? I'm like, oh, yes, I am. And I sent it and they liked it.
There wasn't a conversation about you taking his strip over.
Never. When I was living at home and he was doing the strip, I did help on the strip. I did put on the Zipatone is what he used. For folks who don't know, that's that paper, that film that you cut out and put it onto the image on the actual drawing. And I did do some coloring, some silhouettes at times, and even did the lettering at times. But I did that to get some extra money. I got paid, so it's like I did not in any way, shape, or form think I was getting trained to be a cartoonist at all. I just wanted, money to hang out. And that's what I did.
You thought you were going to be a writer.
I wasn't quite sure what I was going to be. And I went to Syracuse. I went there. You had to have, if you wanted to be in their VPA, College of Visual and Performing Arts, you had to do okay on the SATs. You had to meet that level, but you also had to send in a portfolio. And I the folks, when I was growing up, I had good art teachers. They had what they call talent art classes, and they would always have me in those classes. So I felt like, I am going to study art. That is what I'm going to do. What the hell does that mean? It's like art. That's so big. It's so broad. So I go there and I'm like, I'll be a fashion illustrator. No, I'll be a fashion designer. No, I'll be a painter. It's like I went all over the place.
That's pretty common, I think, with a lot of kids entering college, of just like basically trying to figure out what you don't want to do.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And also when I had and then I was the oddball as well among my friends because I was in this VPA. I was in and nobody else was. And then, I can remember freshman year and me saying, in the dining hall or whatever, because I just gotten back from a studio, and the studios were from, all day, 8 a.m. You have a lunch break until 5. Then you go to the dining hall and everybody's sitting together, and I'm talking about how I'm drawing. It's figure drawing class. They're like, there are naked people in your class. Like, yes, there are. Are there men? Yes. And like, so it was like really a revelation, it's like, so I was an oddball, a bit of an oddball among my friends, and that's okay. It was good. Yeah, what I wanted to do with it.
For a vast majority of people, fine art is not a tenable career path. Is that basically what you bumped up against?
I did. I didn't think, you're sitting there. This is the other thing I didn't like about art school. Because you have these assignments, you do these assignments, and everybody puts their work up on the wall, and then everybody gets to critique. And I was like, why on God's green earth do I care what another 18-year-old thinks about my drawings? But I can remember feeling that. I was like, this isn't quite right. But I also could see some really extraordinary talents in some of my painting classes. I was like, okay, that might not be me. It's like, and then I was like, maybe I like the idea of perhaps album covers, maybe I'm going to be an illustrator, So I was all over the map. And for electives, I was all over the map again. It was like, I like sociology. I like speech. I want to try speech making. I want to try, I was all over the place. Hence, I never got my degree. I had all the credits I needed. There 4 years, but it wasn't in the right place.
Yeah, it wasn't concentrated in a specific area
enough. I needed somebody to hold my hand. Syracuse is big, I needed a guidance counselor, like from high school. It's like, but and mortified my parents, that I would go to school for 4 years, have to pay that loan back till I was 40, and still no degree. Oh.
I was a creative writing major in college, and it was similar. I mean, it wasn't quite like, obviously it wasn't quite hanging, painting on the wall and everybody looked at it, but it's my week to turn in a short story. Everybody here reads it. And that is you're right. It's a mortifying experience. As I'm somebody who I've got a lot of social anxiety, and it was just, I dreaded those moments. But now that I think back on them, and I don't know that this was necessarily the intention, but now that I think back on them, and I write for a living now, I write for a lot of people. I'm a journalist. I think that there is a way in which that kind of gives you a thicker skin, because if you put your stuff in the world, you're going to get criticism.
Yes, that's absolutely true. That's a good point. But the other side of that for me was, these people are my contemporaries. It's like, I want to get real input from somebody who's in the know, and who has, I guess that's the way I felt at the time. But again, like you say, looking back, everybody has something to offer, whether they're your age, even younger, somebody can say something and make you realize, I hadn't thought about it that way. You have kids and you're like, wow, they awaken you to things that you weren't quite, you didn't know. So, but at the time I felt like, what do I care what, Ralph has to say? It's like, myself, my stuff.
Yeah. I'm not even implying that most of the criticism that you get in the real world is constructive at all.
That's true. Absolutely.
Because again, I write online, and there's a very, there's a cliche, never read the comments.
Yeah.
Because they're anonymous.
Yeah.
They're always terrible.
Yeah.
And I think certainly if you're writing, you're writing on a comics page, or, or a comic, not comics page, your stuff is coming out in a newspaper. So it's not necessarily self-selected. It's like anybody who, reads that newspaper can read that script and that strip. And I think an upside of that critique that I just didn't get at the time, that I do get now, is that it gives you a thicker skin, and you learn to either accept and internalize a criticism, for better or for worse, or or you have to sort of double down and if you feel like you're on the right path, then you need to keep going in that direction.
Honestly, yeah, I agree. Because, I got, back when I was doing it, people had to take out a piece of paper, find a pen, write it down, put it in an envelope, find a stamp, put it in the mail, so it wasn't that, immediate, blah, I don't like this. But so I kept the file of, fan and not so fan letters, two different files. And frankly, the not so fan letters were kind of invigorating, and they kind of made me feel like, oh, I pressed a button. I must be on the right path. Oh, this is irritating someone what I say. So I feel it was empowering even as I was working on it.
What were those buttons that you were pressing?
Well, I often got letters about my characters being anti-white. And I'm like, because of their very existence?
That is like, talk about a setup for the current moment. You were ahead of the curve on that feedback.
I'm telling you. But I would also get that I was against men. And it's like, wrong. I would get that from, like I said, like we talked about earlier, that I wasn't in this New York area. And by then I was living in Brooklyn when I was working on the strip, and met a lot of, you have a lot of, it's Fort Greene. So there was like a lot of talent in that area. And, you go to parties, you meet people, all that kind of stuff. And, you find out somebody talks to you and they're like, oh, I'm a cartoonist. Oh, you're a cartoonist. Yeah. Well, usually they think it's, oh, you're doing something for children. It's like, no, it's actually for adults. And then,
or they think animation.
Yes. Yeah. They have these certain ways that they think about, when you say I'm a cartoonist. Or for me, it was also trying to make a distinction. To this day, it's trying to make sure when I'm talking to people that I'm clear. If they say, we're going to have a cartoonist come talk today. And then, you get a whole stream of kids. I'm like, hold it, guys. I don't do comic books. I do newspaper comics. And it's a whole nother animal. But the point what I was getting to is that, so you meet people and you're like, oh, you're a cartoonist. Oh, kids. No, it's adults. My characters are all women. They're all Black women. Oh, so you're just dogging men. I get it. I'm like, you haven't even read it. You just make that assumption, which is, frightening, but also made me feel like that seems like somebody who is insecure, and it served for me as a way to weed out, people who are just making those kinds of assumptions, like, all right, let's dance, but that's as far as this is going to go. It's like, that's how it goes.
It's so interesting, this idea that your existence or the strip's existence, or the fact that, as you said, that it's 9 Black women, that all the characters are Black women, that the sheer existence people feel like is
a problem.
Mm-hmm. But is there also a way in which, it is a statement, or it is, I don't want to say transgressive, but maybe it even was transgressive, an act at the time, or in a way just a political act of just saying, listen, I'm here, and all of my characters are Black women, and I'm gonna I'm gonna take you into this world.
Yeah, well, that makes me think of I was on I got a lot of publicity when it first came out, because I was the first Black woman to be in the mainstream press, and by mainstream we mean the white press.
That's a lot of pressure.
And it's like, oh, we want you on People magazine. We want you. I was like, going back through these boxes of for Drawn and Quarterly, going back through these boxes. I was like, wow, that was really popular. I mean, because some of it was, is in and out. I didn't even hold on to it in my head, but I keep everything because I'm a pack rat. But I was on Good Morning America, right? And we're sitting there. I'm excited, nervous, and what's the guy's name?
Was it Charlie Gibson? Was he the guy at the time?
Maybe. He's the guy with the crazy teeth? Like, Hartman, maybe? No, who is that? There's somebody. Anyway, I can't remember. I feel bad whenever you say anything now. You're like, oh, what did she have to say about? But anyway, just before, we're sitting down, and it's the two of us sitting down. It's like 5 seconds to go, and they do the the number thing.
Yeah, where they get silent for the last two.
Yeah,
countdown.
Yeah, and he leans in and he says, How is this even gonna be sold in in a city that's not a black city? Action! I was like, what? So I don't know if that was his technique on getting me grounded and ready to,
or angry, really.
That I would come back with an attitude, and we'd have a real, maybe terse conversation. I'm very easygoing. It's hard to make me be angry at somebody, and I'm not going to blast anybody in person. I can do that in the but it really made me angry. But the very idea that having black characters, all black characters, in a paper that's in a white community, that they would not be interested in it. I mean, I find that insulting. It's like, by having all black characters, I'm not trying to make a statement that, I'm just, because, conversely, what we know is all white characters, all, and like, are you making a statement? Are you making a statement? This is not part of my existence. So, and hence we become the other, everything seems normal. That's white. Everything that's of color, so to speak, is other. And that's a weird place to be in, we're born into that. So you live with it and you talk about it, and it's interesting.
Anybody who's the first person to do something, especially if it's, let's be honest, especially if it's racial, like, there is a way in which it is kind of inherently political, or whether or not that is your intention, and it sounds like your intention was really to just like to talk about the people that
and to me, because I always want to be able to mention that people say, well, you weren't the first one. I'm like, no, I wasn't the first black woman cartoonist. It was Jackie Orms. She did a comic strip, Torchy Brown, for the Black Press. Black Press was very important. Very important. Many people don't even know anything about the Black Press. So they had Oliver Harrington, one of the great black cartoonists, before my dad, a generation before my dad, and the two of them made a bond. I don't know if they actually didn't meet. I actually met Oliver Harrington, but my dad, they had this mutual admiration going on. And because my dad was in the mainstream press, or in the white press, and it made a difference. So he was like one of the first. He's like, of the three, Maury Turner, Ted Shearer, and my dad were the first three to be in the white press. And
there's actually one important one that doesn't get talked about enough: George Harriman.
Oh, yeah.
I think he passed at the time because I think he was Creole, if I'm not mistaken. But
yes.
It is such an interesting thing that he was, he's still one of the most celebrated cartoonists of all time.
Absolutely. Yeah. There's somebody sent me a story about a slave cartoonist who, it was a very interesting story. We've been cartooning forever, we've been, and it's such a way to record our history, how we are in this, how we were living in this space and time, what we found funny, what we found interesting, worthy of talking or telling a story about. So I always like to bring up Jackie Orms, because I don't want people to think that I don't recognize that. I happen to be, I was a research director. I happen to love research. I love to fact check. That was my job, for many, many years. But when I didn't find out about Jackie Orms until she passed, I think she passed in 1986. So right before Detroit picked me up, I knew about her, and I was like, wow. I was pleased, and I know that I'm standing on her shoulders, but I do make the first in the white press. And, making that, crossover is kind of a thing. It's kind of a thing.
As an archivist and as a self-declared pack rat, as you said, as a researcher by, both job and nature, what was the experience like of working with Drawn and Quarterly and going back and really, digging up not only the strips, but a lot of the, like the paraphernalia, a lot of the stories and a lot of the paperwork around the strip.
It was really kind of exciting for me, because I really had forgotten how publicized I was the first time around. How much?
Because I would think if you go on a Good Morning America, that you never forget that.
Yeah, I mean, I didn't actually forget, but it wasn't foremost in my mind, and so that story that I told you about the Good Morning America, that stuck with me. I tell that story often, but I'm looking at my notebooks, and it's like I saw this. I didn't remember. I saw the Arsenio Hall people had called. I was like, what? I didn't remember that. It's like and my dad would say to me over and over, "You need to write this down." I was like, how could I forget all this that's happening? He's like, "You need to write it down," and I didn't listen. So now I'm going back through boxes, and I'm seeing stuff. I mean, first, talking to do the Drawn and Quarterly thing, you have to go back through your old work, which is scary, to start with, because nobody wants to look at what they did before. So I was pleasantly surprised there. There was enough that I thought, I did have something, but also finding all these. What makes me laugh is things. Often they were saying, "Well, this is the beginning. You were going to take off, and you were going to be, how much money I was going to make, and how big it was going to be, and all that." Of course, I mean, I shouldn't say of course, but none of that materialized.
You made a good living for a long while, and that that's a victory in and of itself.
Yeah, I mean, but when you're depending on how many papers you have, and you don't have, is how much money you make. So there was a pocket of time where I didn't have to do anything else. But other than that, I was hustling.
But when you're in your 20s, and I have a lot of bands on the show, and so this is always a story. When you're in your 20s and somebody's whispering in your ear that you're the next big thing, you believe it.
You do. I can remember. I would be. I found an article where somebody said something like that to me. I said, "Yeah," or none of that could happen. I mean, because that's the kind of sense of humor I have, and none of it did. But nothing. I mean, I had calls from Hollywood. I was flown out to talk about ideas. All these things were happening in the 90s for me. And, some things developed into something that I was no longer connected with, but, that happens too. So that's kind of what I uncovered. It was kind of fun to see some of this old stuff and how I was thinking back then, and how I was perceived back then. And I feel like, I was like, I need to rejuvenate that young one, because I had a lot of nerve. I had a lot of spunk. Something happens, you get older, and you're like, you have a kid, you get married, you have a kid, and you're like, you start second guessing yourself. You're like, oh, I'm ruining my child. Everything is.
Well, things change when there's another life depending on you.
Yeah, dramatically. Yeah, I was asked how did having a kid affect my character, who has only one of my characters has a kid, and I said part of what happened was I thought I knew what it was like to be a parent, so I felt confident having Lydia have a baby. It's like my friends were having babies. I was like, I would babysit. I would go on class trips. I would do, I was doing everything. Anything they couldn't do, I could do. I love kids. I love them. And then I had a kid. I was like, oh my God, it just changes everything. Your whole way of thinking is selfless. You're out of yourself, and you're all about this other little person and making sure they have you're trying to do the best you can at every moment in time and every stage in their life. And you're not always very good about it. But my character got more, would think more about the world, would be more introspective and trying to figure out, am I doing what's the right thing for my child in this space, in this world? Worrying about how she's going to be received in a place that marginalizes her, worrying about what's going on in the world. And also, I let her grow up a little bit, because when she first started, she was just this circle, these little hands, an oval. She was swaddled all the time. And then I was like, she became a toddler, because it was fun to see the way babies move and, act and all that kind of stuff. So it did evolve. It did evolve. And that doesn't always happen in comics. Usually everybody stays the same. Yeah.
Yeah. It's the sitcom thing of it resetting every time you get to the end.
Yeah.
You have a son, is that right?
I do.
And he was born when the strip was still happening?
Yeah. He was born in 1998. And my strip started, I was started in 89. I got the first newspaper. That was Detroit Free Press. And I was syndicated by 1991. And so, yeah, he came in 1988. Yeah.
So he's 24 now. Is that right?
Yeah, he's 24. Yeah.
24. Yeah. Has he or did he express artistic ambitions?
He is a dancer. He is a rapper. He is a brilliant guy. He's
a multi-hyphenate, as they say.
Yeah. Well, my husband is a musician, an accomplished musician. So
I didn't know that.
Yeah. Look up Monty Croft. Instrumentalist, songwriter, composer, all those things. Plays every instrument you can think of. Sings, blah, 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 all of that. And so this is what Chase had grew up with. Me on the drawing table, Dad with instruments all over the house. And he went to NYU. He went to the Gallatin School. And he just graduated 2 years ago, a year and a half ago, whatever. And what's funny is a friend of mine, Tim Fielder, who's a cartoonist, comic book cartoonist, and he went to Gallatin. I knew that. And I'm not really much of a show-off person, but I was like, Tim, I have to tell you, Chase got accepted to Gallatin. His reaction was, a weirdo. And I was like, yes, because you can be such an individual there. So, I mean, he was on the Dean's List twice. He's just this brilliant guy. He's brilliant with words. He's brilliant with all kinds of things. How it's going to manifest ultimately in his life, I don't know.
He sounds like he was in a very similar position to the one that you were in when you went to college.
I didn't realize that, but it's absolutely true. Yes, it's absolutely true. But he got his degree and I didn't.
Part of the reason why I asked about his artistic ambition specifically is because you did what your dad did, and it sounds like from all accounts that he was very supportive of that, which is great, but also and I like to ask this of all artists I speak to who have kids, particularly ones who had parents who are musicians, or whether there's a part of you that almost wants to discourage them from taking that path because how difficult it can be.
I don't. You know what I've always wanted before he was even born, or I was pregnant or whatever. It's like, can I just have a decent human being, somebody who can find happiness and be happy? Of course, that never, put a lot of money in my pocket, or our pockets, but I never discouraged him. I'm not crazy about battle rap, but he's ascending in that world. It's not something that I would, have imagined, but he loves it, and he's good at it. It's like, okay. And I felt like, there was one other, Black girl at the VPA when I was there, in my grade. I don't know what happened to her. I wonder. But I felt it was very different for me to be a Black girl who liked to draw, that her parents allowed her to go to Syracuse and study art. That seems like, didn't seem practical. How are you going to make money? What are you going to do to be, and
that specifically that being a Black woman would make it more difficult to make a living doing it?
I think so. Yes. Yes, absolutely. I fell into doing comics myself, and really loved it once I started it. I was like, oh, I can be heard and nobody has to see me. I like that. It's like behind the scenes. It was just a perfect way to get my crazy ideas and my strong feelings out. So that was great. So yeah, I think it would be difficult. I didn't see any other. When I go to talk at places and I see young Black kids and they're like, they want to study and they don't think their parents are going to let them. They're like, you better do something to make some money. It's like, you better figure a way to let that be in the background. Do that on the side, but don't you're not really encouraged to go full force.
I guess there is a way in which Black parents traditionally have had to be more pragmatic because they know how difficult it is.
Yes, it's passed down. Absolutely passed down. Yeah. I can remember, I'm probably talking on too much, but I can remember my dad, I was saying when I was younger, I was like thinking about the world and world history and all that, because that's the kind of head I had. And I'm like, this is crazy. I have to right these wrongs. This is crazy. This racism and this and that. I'm going to do something.
There's so much to put on yourself, especially as a kid.
I know, but that's the way I felt. And my dad was like, cool your jets.
Might be the best advice he ever gave to you. It's just like, calm down a bit and reassess.
Like, that's not going to happen. He's like, and he used the word insignificant, and I was like, what? Me? And I told him this years later. He was floored that he had said that. He didn't realize that he had said that.
That's kind of harsh. Yeah.
Yeah. It's like, whoa, it's like me. I cannot be, I'm going to do this. But he was like, calm down. And what he was really trying to do is what you recognize at first is like, don't, you can aim for the stars, but just be prepared that the whole world's not going to take you that way. You can, yeah, he just wanted me to be more real, like, let's really look at what we're talking about here.
And just the realization of how much of it is, blind luck and how much of it is timing. I mean, you mentioned, I'm always like, I love talking to cartoonists about their Hollywood deals. I talked to the Hernandez brothers recently, and they spent a lot of time, pitching pilots. And, it's funny because you're saying, this would have been the perfect cartoon for the 90s. It would have made perfect sense. Like if the right thing had come, if like Fox or whoever had come along, like it would have been a perfect fit.
It did. I was flown out there. They hooked me up with an agent at CAA. They hooked me up with Thomas Carter, who is a director and producer. I went and pitched ideas in connection with my characters. They were excited. I actually belong to the Writers Guild because if you get a deal that is a certain amount of money, you have to belong to the Writers Guild.
You don't even need a credit.
No, just that you had a deal and that you were going to get paid this for this idea. But it didn't happen. Other shows came out that were amazingly like the idea that I came out there with. And I didn't get any love behind it, 2 shows came out, and honestly, they, within the book, it's kind of an origin story. So it's, like I said, it tells all this way of how it happened, but it also, there's Rebecca Wanzo, a professor, she teaches, she's a scholar in comics, but also in women's health. I mean, women's rights, and I can't even talk. That's great for a podcast. But she wrote this very long essay that puts my work into historical context, and she had mentioned one of the shows that I was just talking about in her essay. It's like, I get the similarity. I know why there's a similarity.
She didn't know how close she got.
Yeah, she really hit the nail on the head. And I was like, I don't care if anybody else makes that kind of connection. I just didn't want it in my book.
I have an idea. Yeah. We'll talk about when I'm off, but I have some idea of what it might be.
Yeah.
I suspect you don't want to throw anybody under the bus, which I appreciate.
Yeah.
You mentioned in the process of putting the book together of almost reconnecting with this kind of younger firebrand, like cocky, self-assured version of yourself.
Yes.
Did it also spur something in you as far as making art and as far as wanting to kind of to reconnect with that part of your life?
Yes. And I am very grateful that the Drawn and Quarterly people, what a great team they are. They put some of my post syndication strips in there. And I mean, that's not exactly what you asked me, but what spurred me on to start doing it again was when 45 came down the escalator. I was like, okay, I got to start doing this again. And so I did a lot of they're not just political, but they're more direct. And because you have that freedom, you don't have a syndicate, you can say whatever you want. I put it up on Instagram or Facebook or whatever. When I feel it, I don't have a deadline or anything. I just do it when I feel it. But I was so glad that they put that in the book because, and then going through the stuff that I was going through, I was like, yes, I'm on to something here. I feel like I'm on to something that may spark a more courageous Barbara, who used to be, a firecracker back in the day.
I wish that you holding your fist up like that picked up on the audio. It was a great little moment, and unfortunately it will be lost to time.
That's funny. I don't even realize when I do that, but yes.
So basically, Trump coming into office and all the hell that has since broken loose because of it, that awoke something in you.
It absolutely did. It absolutely did. And there's and then the reaction I get, of course, they're my friends or, friends on Facebook or friends on, it's so supportive. They're like, these are great. I was like, thank you. That's exactly what I was thinking, that kind of thing. That I was hearing those same kind of things that I heard when I did the strip, you're saying exactly what I'm thinking, which is really empowering, that I'm a voice for folks who haven't figured out how to make their voice out there.